Rock isn't dead. It's in flux. Hi, everyone. I'm Britt with Rock and Flux, and I'm joined here today by Vincent Segretario of the band WINGTIPS. Thank you for being here with me today. Let's start off with just talking about how WINGTIPS got started as a band and kind of your backstory.
I started making experimental electronic music towards the end of high school. It's kind of aimless and for fun, and I took the name Wingtips and applied it to a band that I started later with Hannah. Just because I had been using it for so long, just for random projects. I even was even my DJ name at one point when I was DJing a lot in Chicago. I just took it and we applied it to the band, and we've just kind of ridden on it ever since.
Why Wingtips? What made you initially think of that as a name? I mean, it is kind of a cool name because you never think about something like that.
So when I was writing music in high school, I had a really brief collaborator, and we were trying to come up with the name. And he came in one day and was like, "Hey, nice wingtips," and I was wearing wingtips, the shoes. He's like, "Hey, thanks." He's like, "That should be the name. That's the name. That's the name." I was like, "Okay, cool." we were, had some other ridiculous names I can't even remember. I think we were gonna name the project Buffalo Trace after the whiskey. Imagine. I can't. That's the only one that I really remember because it was so outrageous.
But that's a cool story because I love when things come about kind of just organically and like the most random thing, like that's the best way. So you're from Chicago. You're still based out of Chicago now, correct?
No, I'm originally from Southern Illinois, and I lived in Chicago for about 8 years. And Hannah lived in Chicago for about 10 years, and we spent like pretty much the whole time I lived there. I was doing this band, and when the pandemic hit, we both relocated to the town where I'm originally from. Because tours were shut down, it just really made no sense for us as full-time touring musicians to be living in a place where nothing's going on and we're just spending a lot of money to live. So we relocated to where it's cheap, and in throughout the process of the pandemic, and when we first started picking the tours back up in 21, we realized it really made a lot of sense for us to be based somewhere kind of quiet, secluded, inexpensive, just because this is what we do is write music. And if we're constantly touring, we don't necessarily have to be based out of anywhere, but Chicago is definitely home, I would say. For me as an artist, it definitely really strong with the roots that I have there, and that this band was created in Chicago, and we built the band there basically. So it's definitely home.
That makes sense. So for people who haven't listened to Wingtips at all and would potentially be new to listening to your music, if you had to pick one song that you would tell them this is the first thing that you should listen to, what song do you think you would choose for that?
It's such an interesting question because the song that people tend to gravitate towards, and it's our most popular song, is "The Eye That Follows Suit." But I think if you really want to kind of get into both of our minds as musicians and just kind of see where our creative energy comes from, in my opinion, I think a song like "Minimalistic," which is the first track off of our second LP, that is kind of just where I think my creative energy is most well exhibited. That's why I think it's interesting because people tend to gravitate towards other you never really know what people are going to like. So, I mean,
Subjective.
yeah, it is very subjective. I never expected half the songs that are most streams, for instance, to be what they were. I mean, but I think thinking about a song that we really put everything into and really wanted to display the range that we try to have, that would be Minimalistic for me.
Okay. Well, let's take a listen to it.
sounds like.
So it's interesting to me because actually that was a song that I was going to bring up to you as we started talking about your music because your first album was called Exposure Therapy and you released that in 2019. And Minimalistic is on your album The Cutting Room Floor. It was your second release in 2021. And overall, you have your main sound, I feel, is present in both, but I do feel The Cutting Room Floor is different than Exposure Therapy because I don't know if this is the right comparison, but for me, it's a little less 80s. It still has that influence in there, but maybe a little less. But it sounds like an updated Yaz or Yazoo as the UK version of that band name. But it's like more electronic. Like if to me, it would be like if Yaz was a band now, that's what they would sound like. Because it's got like more of that electronic feel, but some of those same elements, but then also still the influences that were, I think, more present in the first album too. Am I totally off in what
No,
I'm
I think you're pretty spot on. One of the approaches that we wanted to take when we were doing Cutting Room Floor is we wanted to strip things back a bit. We really wanted to have more of an electronic element as opposed to more of an electro pop element, I should say, as opposed to a more dark wave tinged element like you'd hear in the first record. The first record's has some of my favorite songs on it, but it's definitely we wanted to change the way that we produced and the sounds that we were making coming from the first record. The first record is just very deeply shimmering layers of guitar, has a lot of like dreamy elements. There's just some aggression in it too, of course. It's kind of like a cinematic curve, is how we try to do our records. On the second record, we really just were wanted to simplify things, cut things back, and what was left, punch it forward. And we thought the best way to do that was through kind of a really strong electronic, almost dance element, but more electro pop.
it definitely has that feel to it more so, I would say. Exposure Therapy, you can hear that Cure influence pretty heavily, and you still get some of that with Cutting Room Floor, but I definitely can hear, like, the more electronic and more pop forward elements of that. But I think, it very much comes through with what you all are trying to do, and I think it sounds great. It's, bands should kind of evolve over time, and I think also you tend to put albums out and music out or art out that you're feeling at the time. We're all in different moods and different thought processes and things like that. So, did you record The Cutting Room Floor during COVID, or was it after all of that kind of cleared up?
We recorded Cutting Room Floor. It wasn't when the pandemic was first like really bad. We started writing it. I think I was going into the studio every single day from like the end of 2020, like December into January of the following year. I was going into the studio every single day, but I remember it was right at the beginning of the year and it was freezing where I'm at. And so, yeah, it's a pandemic album, but all the stuff that we had demoed prior to all of our records or both of our records at the time of recording weren't necessarily done right then and there. We've demoed stuff and we'll bring things and kind of Frankenstein something until it sounds like a song. But yeah, that a lot of the work on that record is definitely pandemic period.
And you said that you moved out of the Chicago area when you were recording all of that. Do you feel like, well, actually, did you record any of it when before you moved? And then if you didn't, do you feel like being in an area that's maybe not as like bustling as Chicago affected your recording process or how you approached even, writing music?
Oh, yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, pieces of it were recorded in the like, even in the time that we were writing music for exposure therapy and before, there were elements of songs definitely that I can trace back, like, 5, 6 years ago or something, in just stuff that's been kind of just sitting, waiting to be used, and then we finally find a way to make it work. And to answer the other part of your question, definitely living in Chicago. Living there, I mean, I was recording in small, like, at one point, I had an apartment that was a small little room, and then at one point, I was recording in the kitchen, uh, and here where I live now, I have a lot of space, and, yeah, you mentioned, like, the kind of hustle and bustle factor. It's really quiet, and so it's good to take those, like, peaceful mental breaks to where you can actually hear yourself think. But, I think both areas geographically have their value in terms of being a recording artist, because in Chicago, there's a lot of stuff going on, obviously. I guess you just say the influence of what you see around you when you see other bands play and the inspiration, it's never dwindling. And here, it's much slower, lower population, less things going on. And so that is something that I when I go back to Chicago, I really am realize how much I missed it.
Right, and appreciate it probably too.
Of course.
So do you still do any DJ work, or are you fully just wingtips only?
Yeah, I mean, I do DJing on the side. It's not something that I have as a career right now. Yeah, where I live, I work at a venue and sometimes hold DJ nights, and I really enjoy mixing and doing DJ sets. I'm really into like dark techno and industrial. So, but there's not much of a scene for that here. Chicago, totally different. Hello, Wax Tracks.
Well, I was gonna actually ask you because I when I was reading about you all, like, is there a bigger goth scene in Chicago? Because you all tend to kind of lean more to that aesthetic and style. So, have you always liked that kind of vibe, or did that happen over time? Is there a scene that you kind of got into? Like, how did you all kind of get into that style of things?
When Hannah and I were first hanging out, even before we really started the band, we were hanging out in new wave parties and goth clubs. We were really into the music, and we wanted to do stuff that had that intensity and that kind of romanticism and the sound and the lush textures. We're really attracted to all that as party goers and nightclub patrons. And then we owned that and decided to do something in that style. So yeah, I mean, naturally it's where we went first, and it's a scene that welcomed us with open arms, and we were able to really get a start.
Let me ask you this, and I've never asked anybody, and a lot of the different bands that I've talked to, it all kind of blends together, right? Like the new wave, the goth, the industrial, it all can kind of intermix. What about the goth aesthetic and lifestyle do you think embraces that synth and 80s nostalgia and that new wave feel? Do you think it's something specific, like with people who gravitate to that? Like, what do you think that connection comes from?
I think it kind of in a lot of ways speaks for itself. It's just something that's survived for so long, and it's almost like a culture keeping up with its traditions, And so I think that when you have that kind of passion for something, it kind of carries through other aspects of your life. And so I think that people just really identify.
I guess too, it kind of is like it's the continuation of punk, right? Because that's really where I think a lot of that originated, and it's ultimately where new wave originated. But they took like the ideals and the style and some of the elements of punk and kind of made it more palatable for more people.
I always recall, like, so many bands went to that one Sex Pistols show in the UK. It's like Depeche Mode were there, I think, and the New Order and The Cure were all there.
Yeah, it all stems from that, which is so crazy because Depeche Mode and The Cure, like, they're musicians, they care about their craft, and they really write and hone their music. And the Sex Pistols really were not musicians. Like they, you know what I mean? Like that was not
I
like
don't think
Sid
anyone's
Vicious.
gonna be upset with you.
No, yeah, no. And Sid Vicious like didn't really know how to play bass, but they were like, you can still do it.
You
Like
play bass now. This is what you
right.
do.
You got the attitude, you can do it. Just like we got to get on stage and do this. And like, I mean, that is great, but it's so different from those new wave bands because they took that and were like, well, we really want to hone this out and care about what we're playing and everything else. So it's
Yeah,
interesting
and you
how
have bands like Kraftwerk that were like I feel solely responsible for really bringing about that electronic element in a real band, creating the groundwork. Also, another massively popular band meets this punk thing in When Worlds Collide.
yeah, that's true. So like, and we've talked about The Cure. What other influences do you all kind of pull from your music? Because I'm sure like not all of it is the older new wave artists.
To be honest, I haven't really listened to much older new wave stuff or post punk. I mean, I listen to it on occasion, but our sound has a lot of different influence. And definitely early on, the guitar work was really Cure heavy, very chorusy. I think that the electronic element really came from me. I was listening to a lot of like chiptune music and synth pop, like weird, obscure synth pop, and so that those elements kind of sat on top of each other. I was listening to that a lot whenever I was first starting to write music, and I went in that direction a bit. But yeah, I listen. Hannah and I both listen to a lot of weird stuff. I mean, but also '90s pop too. Like Savage Garden is one of my favorite bands. Definitely a big influence. Really into just intense performance heavy music. One of Hannah and I's absolute favorite artists is Dio, and I grew up listening to Kiss, and I still do. It's one of my favorite bands. And so the influences are all over the place. You'll find Cher there, and you'll it's all over. Yeah, definitely not just post-punk and goth, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that makes sense because no one's going to listen to just one thing.
Yeah, and at shows, a lot of times people just wanna when we meet our fans, they just wanna talk about the Sisters of Mercy or whatever band, and it's like, yeah, stuff's cool." Uh,
Right. It's funny you bring up Savage Garden because I was just listening to them like somehow it cropped up on my Spotify and I was like, this is actually it's still good music. Like it still holds up even though it was I mean, gosh, the 90s now doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but it
right.
was. But it's still those are absolutely good pop songs. So, we've talked about your influences. I know that you are friendly with a decent amount of the bands that are kind of in this whole electronic synth new wave community, I like to call it. And it's funny because I just released the Twin Tribes interview today, and I know you all have done remixes of each other's songs. Can you tell me a little bit about how those came to be? Most recently, they did a remix of your song "Innocent Blood." So how and then you all have remixed their song "Exilio." So how did you find each other on social media and kind of, work together from there? How did all that happen?
We've known Twin Tribes for quite a while. I wanna say that we both started out around the same time, and, we first met them at a show in Nashville that, that they were opening for us. It's crazy, considering how big they've gotten so quickly. There was a time where they were opening for us. So we played with them and immediately hit it off. They were organizing the altars, the remix compilation that they put out, and they asked us what song we wanted to remix if we wanted to remix one, and we picked Exilio. And then after that, it was looking good for tours, and this is mid-pandemic. It was looking good for tours, and we kind of bit the bullet and gave it a try. Had a successful almost like month-long tour with them. Then, we picked up again summer of last year. We did another round of shows with them, and, now I'm touring with them as their, sound engineer.
Very cool. It's funny how that all kinda mixes together. And it's funny also because that's the thing, like, it's so interesting about music and when bands play because you all are from completely different states. You meet at a show in another state, and then it just all kinda goes from there. So I always think that that's really interesting. And then another band that I've also talked to that you all have worked with is Traders. They did a remix of I That Follows Suit. Is it a similar story with how you kinda got to know them as well, just you played together, or how did that all come about as well?
Yeah, we have done a few shows with Traders in the past, I think 2 years. We've done about 4 or 5 shows with them. Really get on with them and, really great guys, really talented musicians. I knew that they would do a really good job remixing one of our songs because texturally and tonally, we're kinda similar bands, and, I think that's why we're a good match for live shows too.
Cool. I mean, so far, everyone I've talked to has been super nice, which is also refreshing because it's not always the case. So, I mean, you all have done several tours and played live. Do you have, like, any interesting stories or experiences from shows and playing live that, would maybe be cool to share with listeners? One of the fun stories that I've been told from I think the KVB told me one, and actually Twin Tribes told me one was because especially when you're focused a lot on the electronic side of music, all the different elements of that. Has anything ever gone wrong with any of your equipment during a show? And if it did, what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I've had guitars crap out on me before. I'd say, like, when we were first starting, and this is, like, 2015, 16. When we were first starting, we were running our sampling and our backing off of a shitty computer. And it was running off of a even shittier DJ interface that I got at a pawn shop.
Oh boy.
So we would be in the middle of a song and it just completely drop.
What did you
All
do?
all the audio just completely down. And we just like, "Oh shit, what do we do? Oh my god." Yeah, we were really DIY in it whenever we first started. Since then, we've become more in tune with our gear and understanding, like, how things work, and, I'm gonna knock on wood right now. Like, we've been blessed by the gods of lack of technical difficulty.
That's good. That's a good
And
thing.
hopefully it remains that way.
Yeah. What should people, if they're gonna come see you live, what could they expect from a live show?
I'll just use other people's words. The thing that we hear the most often is, "Wow, that's a lot of energy and a lot of sound from just 2 people."
That's
So,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Hannah and I come from a theatrical background. We really feel like we understand performance value, and we really wanna entertain people, and we wanna give an excellent performance, and a lot of things are really calculated, and, it's really just important to us. So, hopefully, if what we try to do is put on a good show, and hopefully people are gonna get it.
Well, very cool. I intend whenever you all are out here, or if I'm in a city that you're playing in, I'm gonna come see you live. I'm in Phoenix,
You're in
so
Phoenix, yeah,
yeah.
I'll be in Phoenix with, Twin Tribes Sunday, May 21st.
Okay. I will be there. So something that I do like to ask everybody who comes on this show is because the branding is basically is rock dead, right? And I don't think it is. I think it's in flux. I mean, for me, if I hear the term rock, I don't necessarily think of like a rock band per
Sure.
se. I know some people do, but I always like to get people's opinions on that and if they think it's dead. So, what would your thoughts be?
No, and I agree with you. It's not a rock. When you think of rock, I don't think of rock band either. I'm going to sound a bit cliche, but rock is an attitude. It's a personality. It's everything that's not music and everything that is music. So it's in all of us.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, most of us. So some of us just have no rhythm.
Like stick Man, it's like,
Yeah.
what Jack Black said in School of Rock, some of that's true, you know? It's about having a good time and sticking it to the man. Yeah, it's just really to me, it's about, like, being yourself and being true to yourself.
Yeah, it's kinda like, being a punk. It doesn't have to you don't have to listen to punk rock to be a punk.
Exactly. So any last thoughts or anything that you want listeners to know about Wingtips and what you all have coming up?
We are working on a new record,
Cool.
and it is coming along very well,
Nice.
and it will come along. I promise. It may not be this year. With the way the vinyl pressing plants are working right now, it's definitely not gonna be out this year, but it's largely complete, and it's exciting. I'm so excited about it. And yeah, in the earlier part of the interview, we talked about like where exposure therapy, our first record, came from to cutting room floor and the changes. It's same trajectory. And I'm excited.
Cool. It sounds like it's gonna be really good.
Yeah, and yeah, we got some shows in Europe, or we have one right now that's at Wave Gothic Treffen in Leipzig, Germany, on the 27th of May. We this next month, this is April coming up, right? We have a show in we're playing Fixation in Detroit.
I think I saw a date in Florida in October. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, and we're doing Absolution Fest in Tampa in October. And I can't really think of anything else at this time, but more stuff will happen, and definitely big tours for 2024. But we're still here. In
That's I
case
mean,
anyone was wondering.
all things considered, for what musicians have had to go through over the last, 3 years, I would say that's definitely a good thing and something that you should be proud of, that you all stuck it out and stuck around. So, I appreciate you taking the time. This has been a great conversation. You can be found on Instagram at Wingtips, right?
Wingtips for real, the number four.
For
Wingtips
real.
for
That's right.
real. Same with Facebook and Twitter. Wingtips for real.
Got it. And you can listen to your music on YouTube and all of the different streaming platforms too.
Yep, we're everywhere. We like it when you buy our music directly, but
Where
everyone
can
loves
people buy
Spotify. I love Spotify. I have Spotify up on my computer right now, and I know how it is. So.
it? Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
we're
where can you
everywhere.
buy it? Where would people, if people wanted to purchase, where would they go to do that?
If you want to purchase music directly from us, you'll go to wingtips.bandcamp.com. And I think we're having a vinyl sale right now on Bandcamp. And so now's a chance to purchase some a discounted vinyl. I think that's what I saw, that it was on sale. CDs too, maybe. And people still like CDs.
Get on it, people. Well, Vincent, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming and taking the time to talk with me. It's been great to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.